Hi, my name is Isaac Balachandran, matrix number TK24040, and I'll be presenting about project management. Just a brief introduction, there are 5 phases in the project lifecycle. First is initiation, second is planning, third is execution, fourth is monitoring and controlling, and finally the fifth is closure. So what is project management? Project management is essentially a coordinated effort to achieve defined goals within the constraints of time, cost, and the scope, involving knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to meet the requirements set by the client. An example of this would be developing a new mobile app from concept to launch. So these are the characteristics of a project. So the temporary characteristics are the start and end date. The unique characteristics are the distinct product, service, or result that the client wants. And next is goal-driven, focused on achieving specific objectives set by the client. And finally, an example of this would be building a bridge or routine maintenance. The first is providing a product, and the second is just a service. Project management is important to align our resources and timelines with organizational goals, reduce risk of failure by structured planning, as well as enhancing communication among stakeholders. The triple constraint in project management is time, scope, and cost. So scope defines what's included or excluded in the project or service. Time, schedules, deadlines, milestones, and cost is the budget or financial resources. Balancing these 3 aspects ensures project success. For example, delivering a product faster may increase the cost or reduce the scope. Now moving on to the first phase in the project lifecycle, which is initiation. In initiation, the first step is to define the problem and success criteria, which is done by stating the needs, desired outcomes, and measurable targets. The next step would be to draft the business case, which compares costs, risks, and benefits. The third step is identifying stakeholders by listing who is affected, who decides, and who funds the project. The fourth step would be to outline high-level scope and constraints, decide what's in and out, key assumptions, dependencies, deadlines, and budget caps. The fifth step would be to establish governance and appoint the project manager by defining decision rights, escalation paths, and roles. Create and approve the project charter would be the last step, which is done by summarizing the scope, milestones, budget, risk, and authority to proceed. Now we move on to the second phase in the project lifecycle, which is planning. The first step of the planning phase is to decompose the scope into a work breakdown structure, which breaks deliverables into work packages with acceptance criteria. The next step would be to sequence activities and estimate durations by mapping dependencies and estimating the effort and time required, which can be simplified by using a network diagram. The third step would be to build the schedule and set milestones by creating a Gantt chart, adding buffers, defining gates, and publishing a schedule baseline. The fourth step would be to estimate costs and set the budget by doing bottom-up estimates, vendor quotes, contingency, and management reserve, essentially the cost baseline. The fifth step, which is planning resources and team structure, focuses on defining roles, skills, capacity, and onboarding, and other various things. The sixth step, which is planning quality, risk, and changing control by defining standards, acceptance criteria, risk responses, and changing workflow. The seventh step is planning communications and stakeholder engagement by deciding who needs what info, when, and how. And the eighth and final step is integrating plans and getting approval, which essentially confirms the key performance indicators and signs the integrated plan. Now moving on to the execution phase of the project. The first step in the execution phase is to kick off and align ways of working by reconfirming goals, roles, and decision roles. And the second step would be to assign work and manage the flow by distributing tasks, track projects, and remove blockers to maintain task board or sprints. The third step would be to produce deliverables with built-in quality by applying standards, peer reviews, testing, and audits to record the quality of the product or service produced. The fourth step would be to coordinate vendors and procurement, so placing orders, tracking deliveries, managing SLAs, and changing orders. The fifth step would be to engage stakeholders and communicate by showing demos, progress updates, feedback loops to capture decisions and actions made during the execution phase. The sixth step would be to implement, approve changes. So these changes are essentially approved by the stakeholders that provide feedback based on the updates. And the final step of the execution phase is to just lead the team by resolving issues and motivating, facilitating when necessary, and escalating when needed. Now, moving on to monitoring and controlling. The first step of this would be to measure performance against baselines, so tracking scope, schedule, and cost variances. Next step would be to control scope and validate deliverables to prevent creep in the costs. The next step would be managing schedules and cost variances, so correcting what went wrong in step 2. The fourth step would be to monitor the risk and execute the responses by reviewing triggers and updating probabilities and impacts. The fifth step would be ensuring quality control, which can be done by inspecting the outputs and tracking defects, essentially publishing a quality control report. The sixth step, which is the report status and decisions, can be helped by summarizing the progress, variances, and risk, as well as actions for sponsors committee. And finally, we have the audit compliance and capture interim lessons. So this checks process adherence and documents insights for continuous improvement. And finally, we move on to the last phase of the project lifecycle, which is closure. The first step would be to verify and accept final deliverables by confirming requirements met and obtain formal acceptance. Next would be to transition to operations and support by training users and handing over documentation. The third step would be to close contracts and financials by providing final invoices, releasing retainers, and reconciling budgets. The fourth step would be to archive documentation and artifacts by storing plans, baselines, logs, codes for future reference. The fifth step would be to conduct the lessons learned workshop, what worked, what didn't, and any recommendations for future projects, all published in a concise report. And finally, celebrating and recognizing contributions, acknowledging the team that worked to achieve the project goals. So just a conclusion now to sum everything up. So based on the entire process of project management, we know that projects are temporary, goal-driven efforts with defined start and endpoints. Success depends on the triple constraint, scope, time, and cost. Sacrificing either one of these aspects can lead to the failure of a specific project. There are 5 phases in total: the initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, as well as the closure, which provides a structured roadmap in project management. Effective management ensures clear objectives, stakeholder alignment, risk control, and quality deliverables. Closing the project with lessons learned and recognition ensures lasting value and continuous improvement for a company. That's all from me. Thank you.